Cool. Just testing that this is working. Wa alaikum salam. M1L, are you able to hear me okay? I'm just checking the audio is working. Okay, yeah, that seems to be fine. Brilliant, thanks. And just let me know if the audio from this... Thanks, man. I'll be hopefully uploading more in the future, but let me know if this audio as well from the video is working too, if you're able to hear this.
Attempting to kill terrorists and civilian casualties.
If that's coming through okay, then that's brilliant. Great, cheers. Yeah, so essentially I think most people watching this are probably not going to see it until it actually gets uploaded. So what I'm probably going to do is... Yeah, I expect most people to only see this later. But anyway, for anyone else who's recently joined, which is probably not many yet, for those of you who don't know, Ben Shapiro recently showed up to my ends. And by my ends, I just mean the general vicinity in my region of the country, because I don't actually live in Oxford, anywhere near Oxford University. So Oxford Union took a nice long look at the ongoing genocidal war being waged against Gaza, and they thought to themselves, wouldn't this be a great opportunity for a nice, nuanced, intellectual discussion about whether or not the Palestinian people deserve to be bombed into smithereens or not? Why don't we bring on a media-trained, cowardly little rat like Ben Shapiro and have him up against a bunch of student activists, and we'll see how that goes. That'll make a great balanced discussion, wouldn't it? So it went about as well as you can expect, which was, well, not very good, to say the least. The thing with Ben Shapiro is that not only is he an idiot, and not only is he wrong on nearly every single thing he says, but he's also a coward who utterly refuses to debate people of his own caliber in media training. The most basic, historically literate person could absolutely plaster him against the wall when it comes to any topic related to Israel and Palestine. And he utterly refuses to actually enter into discussions with them and exclusively talks to students who don't know what they're talking about. Not to toot my own horn here, but whether it was me, whether it was someone as well versed as like a commentator such as Sam Cedar, he would get plastered effortlessly. Shapiro, that is. Because he just doesn't know what he's talking about. So anyway, what we're going to probably do is react to a few clips of this. And the reason I'm reacting to clips rather than the full stream is because these are the clips that Shapiro, his fans, and his boyfriend, Douglas Murray, have uploaded. So presumably these are his best arguments. These are the highlights of the discussion. And if these arguments are shit, then it just means everything that he talks about is in this entire debate and this entire speech is going to be rubbish as well, by extension. So, yeah, we'll have a look at some of his best moments, and we'll see if they actually hold up to scrutiny. So, okay, let's see this. Ben Shapiro schooled anti-Israel activist at Oxford University.
Attempting to kill terrorists and civilian casualties are a cost of war. That is just a reality of life. During World War II, there were 70,000 Brits who died during the Blitz bombing, and there were 2 million Germans who died, civilians who died during World War II. And I don't see a lot of monuments in Britain because of the 2 million civilians who died.
So I just want to point out that is factually incorrect. Whilst it is indeed the case that 70,000 Brits were killed in German bombing in World War II, it is not the case that 2 million German civilians were killed by Allied bombing in World War II. 2 million German civilians did die, but it's estimated that only around 300 to 500,000 of those German civilians were killed as a result of Allied strategic bombing. The remaining 1.5 million were killed as a consequence of a combination of two things: Soviet forced labor and expulsions, and obviously the Nazis' genocidal campaigns against their own people. So no, the Allies did not kill 2 million German civilians in World War II. That is, dare I say it, Nazi propaganda. But I don't think Shapiro is actually intelligent enough to realize that, so he just runs numbers off the top of his head as though he's saying something intelligent. Now, 500,000 is still a significant number of people killed in Allied bombing. But bear in mind, this was Allied strategic bombing. For those of you who don't know what strategic bombing is basically when it was a tactic adopted by the Allies of the Axis during World War II. They would essentially fly over with their bombers over a city and essentially decimate their industrial infrastructure, manufactories, in order to deny them the capability to wage war. Because obviously, if you take out the enemy's war production in World War II, you basically destroy their ability to fight you, essentially. Now, the problem with this, obviously, is back then they didn't have things like satellite imagery. They didn't have precision-guided missiles. They didn't have drones. So they were essentially dropping bombs. I wouldn't say blindly, because obviously they could still see roughly where the densely populated, dense sort of industrial hubs were. But generally speaking, they couldn't tell if they were killing civilians or not. So the consequence of this was, of course, the fact that they would kill a tremendous number of civilians. And the estimate is for German civilians killed between 300 to 500,000. So not 2 million, as he said, but it's still significant. Now, we don't have strategic bombing anymore. We've moved well beyond that. So bringing up comparisons to World War II strategic bombing and saying, well, they accidentally killed a lot of civilians, isn't really the justification that Ben thinks it is. But we'll talk more about that in just a moment, because there are quite a few things I want to say about this comparison. But we'll wait for him to finish asking his question, because I have sort of interrupted his train of thought. Not that he was leading on to something intelligent, mind you.
Awesome work, brutal, they're terrible, they're horrifying. There's a vast difference in moral scope between deliberately going into a civilian area and murdering everyone you can find, and trying to kill a terrorist who is deliberately hiding beneath a civilian area, hiding the rockets in civilian areas, starving their own people. There is a vast difference. Okay, so let me, now I can ask my question if you don't mind. So my question is, do you believe that there is a moral difference between Hamas going into, for example, Kfar Aza and murdering entire families, and Israel attempting to target terrorists and accidentally hitting civilians?
So to answer his question, yes, there is indeed a moral difference between what Hamas and Israel have done. Because what Israel have done is worse. Let me explain what Ben Shapiro is trying to get at here and why he is completely misrepresenting what a civilian casualty is. So a lot of people, Shapiro included, are under the misconception that a civilian casualty is someone who is accidentally killed in war, like accidentally killed as a result of a bombing campaign. So remember what I just described about the Allied strategic bombing, not being able to see civilians and then just like decimating entire neighborhoods and the manufactories because they couldn't tell what from what. Well, we don't have that anymore. So what Shapiro is describing here, these civilian casualties, are not being killed by Israel by accident. Israel is looking at, say, the Jabalia refugee camp, the safe areas they've told Palestinians to flee to in Khan Yunis and Rafah. They are looking at those areas. They can see hundreds of civilians there. They can see the hundreds of civilians going down the routes to get to those areas, and they are deciding to bomb them anyway, with the possibility of maybe killing and maiming a couple of Hamas militants. So no, the comparison is not the same here. Yeah, he is basically comparing apples to oranges. Like, what he is describing here is just, it's not what happened in World War II. And also, just to speak a bit more on that, he claimed that they're targeting Hamas militants. So that is factually incorrect, and we can prove it's incorrect by pointing to the fact that they have no evidence whatsoever that there are rockets in each of the individual houses within the neighborhoods. They have completely flattened to the ground. Because remember, This is not strategic bombing. This is not carpet bombing where you accidentally destroy a few houses in the process. They are targeting these places individually with precision-guided munitions. They have made an assessment that either there is a Hamas militant in that house, or there isn't and they don't care and they're going to bomb it anyway. They are targeting these civilian areas deliberately, knowing they are going to kill hundreds of people, with the belief or with the claim that, or justification that it might kill a couple of Hamas militants as well. So yeah, no, it is not the same thing. They are not accidentally hitting civilians here. They are weighing the value of their lives. They are adding up those hundreds of civilians they're about to kill, and they are deeming them worth nothing because of the possibility they may kill a Hamas militant, supposedly. Yeah, it is completely insane. It's completely insane and completely deranged.
Israel is effectively doing the same because Gaza is the most densely populated region in the world. There are 15,000 people per square mile.
So does Hamas get immunity because they're there? So Hamas gets immunity. So
Israel has killed 3,500 children in the past.
Well, the applause that I would get if I were there, because I would be completely destroying every single point that he's making here. Now, she is completely correct. Gaza is indeed one of the most densely populated places in the Middle East, and one of the most densely populated places in the world, probably like second or third to like Bangladesh or something. Now, Shapiro's claim that, does that mean they get a free pass? No, it doesn't mean they get a free pass. Now, okay, first of all, with insurgency groups, you can't defeat them by just bombing civilian areas and hoping you're going to kill a few Hamas militants. The reason why you can't do that is because, okay, let's think about this for a minute. Israel told 1 million Palestinians to evacuate from Gaza City, and they said, okay, we just want to fight Hamas. Where do you think those Hamas militants are going to go? Or, sorry, where do you think the Hamas senior leadership that is in Gaza, or those that remain in Gaza, are going to go? They're going to go south. This is not a strategy to defeating Hamas, even if supposing defeating Hamas was their intention, which it's not, by the way, and we know it's not because they're bombing the safe areas as well, and they're bombing areas in the West Bank where Hamas don't have power, and they are mass disappearing Palestinians within Israel proper, and they are killing Palestinians en masse in the West Bank, again, where Hamas isn't. So, yeah, destroying Hamas isn't their aim, but even if it was, the strategy they're taking here wouldn't lead to its destruction. So Ben Shapiro's false, and his, what's the word? False dichotomy, where he says either you allow Israel to bomb Gaza to scorched rubble or you allow Hamas to get away, it's a false dichotomy, because destroying Gaza is not going to defeat Hamas. You're just going to radicalize more people into joining Hamas, obviously. That's what's going to happen here. In terms of how you could defeat Hamas, they're not going to like the answer. And they're going to have to give reparations to the Palestinian people. That's literally the only way it's going to work. But Shapiro doesn't want to hear that. He doesn't want to hear that Israel is responsible for this state of affairs. They are responsible for pushing the Palestinians to the brink where they feel they have no other choice other than to do incursions and do quote-unquote terrorist attacks against Israel for their, for their own self-determination. They are absolutely just trying to start another Nakba. And yes, they will do the same thing in the Sinai. We know they're trying to start another Nakba because liquid politicians are gloating about the possibility of doing another Nakba. They are calling for it openly. Yeah, there is no doubt whatsoever that is their aim. Even some of their leaked documents, written by sort of non-binding government recommendations. I can't remember the exact one that was leaked, but it basically said that one of the possibilities they should consider is just mass expelling all the Palestinians from Gaza, which they basically kind of already, which to be honest wasn't really that much of a revelation because they'd already said to the Palestinians in Gaza City to leave, which is textbook ethnic cleansing. If you say leave Gaza City and go south, or we're going to annihilate you, that's just ethnic cleansing. And then they went ahead and bombed the south anyway, so yeah. Thank you, Guy Strike.
So just to be clear, your logic is that if you're a terrorist group located in a densely populated community, you hide behind civilians, you're now immune.
Where are the
Oh my God, I love Ben Shapiro's logic here. So hang on a minute. If you, an American police officer, stroll up to a hostage situation where you've got an assailant and he's got a gun to the hostage's head and you want to kill that assailant, you just fucking shoot, sorry, mind my language, but you just shoot straight through the hostage. You kill the hostage, you kill the assailant, you kill everybody else there as well. That is... that is so no, it's not funny, but it is just, it's ludicrous, it's insane. But to be honest, that's how much he values Palestinian lives. Like, okay, there's a Hamas militant in that house, allegedly, according to Israel. I mean, they've got no evidence for it. There's a Hamas militant. Just bomb the entire neighborhood. Why not? Why not bomb the entire neighborhood? Why not kill everybody there? Because, well, it's more important that we get them. So I was watching the LBC news host, James O'Brien, the liberal bloke on there, and he was basically asking the callers a question, which is, if Hamas were hiding out in Tel Aviv, the way they're hiding out in Gaza City, and their underground tunnel network was in Tel Aviv, would Israel bomb Tel Aviv to scorch rubble so that they could kill Hamas? Oh yeah, we didn't even mention that Hamas are in the tunnels, most of them are, so bombing entire residential neighborhoods isn't going to kill anyone, or is not going to really kill any of the Hamas militants. It's just going to kill civilians.
So you're okay.
Yeah, just put words straight into her mouth. Don't even try to defend your position.
I haven't seen any conventions, but okay. You're watching it.
Sorry, since 2005, 23 out of every 24 conflict deaths have been Palestinian. I don't see any moral equivalency there. It's clearly...
She is completely correct here again. I do think that it would be better if she pushed back directly on the points he was making, because the statistics she's raising here are completely correct. But from the point of view of the audience, it just looks as though she's talking past him rather than addressing what he is saying. The logic of what he's saying is so deranged, and I think the reason she's not pushing back on it is because when she thinks about that, even for a moment, like what he's saying, that it's okay to mass murder Palestinians so long as you get a couple of Hamas militants, it's completely deranged. But that is, believe it or not, what he is proposing, and that is what should be drawn attention to. But yeah, it won't stop him from completely strawmanning her regardless.
What the IDF has been doing with the Palestinians, because there's a vast disparity between the number of Palestinians being killed and the number of Israelis.
I mean, I would certainly hope that Israel's going more. I'm just asking you, if based on the numbers, more Germans died than Brits in World War II, did that mean that the British were wrong in World War II? Because they did. Many more Germans died than Brits. Based on the numbers, that means that Britain was wrong in World War II.
Britain wasn't bombing civilians.
Okay, so that is a pretty stupid response. They were bombing civilians. Now, I want to talk again a little bit more about this comparison that Shapiro has raised here with regards to World War II. So, to reiterate, Shapiro is comparing Allied strategic bombing, which is in often case blind, which killed a lot of German civilians, to Israel carrying out targeted munition attacks launching targeted munitions at individual Palestinian houses, hospitals, schools, and then using this to level entire neighborhoods and at safe routes and safe areas. So we are talking about accidental civilians, and we are comparing them to the mass murder, deliberate killing of civilians, which is intended to hopefully maybe kill a couple of militants in the process. So again, these aren't the same thing, but I want to talk about the numbers a little bit more here, because she has raised a point with regards to the numbers. So to put into context, and I'm just going to actually check what the updated numbers are, because I know AJ has a bunch of them. Palestine live, what is their live conflict saying? So they usually have the numbers, and they're usually quite reliable. Live updates, military analysis. Let me see. Okay, so that's that. Simple guide. Statistics. Do we have? Oh, is it this one? Here we go. Perfect. So, as of November the 3rd, so as for yesterday, 9,227 Palestinians have been killed. So would it be fair to say we are roughly 5 weeks into this into this new war. If we suppose, right, then in 4 weeks, and I'm going to do a bit of a calculation here, right? Israel have killed 8,000 Palestinian civilians in 4 weeks, right? So let's try and map that onto the casualties in World War II. So there are 8,000 Palestinian civilians killed in 4 weeks. Let's work out what the weekly death count is. So 8,000 divided by 4, we come to 2,000. They're killing an average of 2,000 Palestinian civilians per week, which is a really insane number. Bear in mind, at least 40% of those are children. 2,000 Palestinian civilians per week are being killed in Israeli airstrikes. Let's work out how much that would be in a year. 2,000 times 52 weeks in a year, that's about 104,000. Now, World War II lasted for around 5 years, if I remember. Well, no, it was a bit more than 5 years, sorry, that's wrong. But the war against Germany specifically was around 5 years. So let's go with that number for the time being. 104,000 casualties in a year by Israel killing Palestinians. Multiply that by 5, we end up with 520,000 Palestinians. So that means that if Israel were fighting in World War II, they would have killed 520,000 Palestinian civilians, which is higher than the Allies killed German civilians. But there's an important thing we're not bearing in mind here. The German population prior to World War II was orders of magnitude larger than the Palestinian population in Gaza. Let's just work out how much larger. German population in World War II. So they had around 80 million people. The Palestinians in Gaza are roughly 2 million, I think, and maybe a bit more. So now considering that difference, 80 million divided by 2 million, or just 80 divided by 2 for now. So we're looking at, obviously, so that's like what? 40? So 40 times larger the population of World War II Germany was compared to modern day Gaza. So if we now take that number of 502,000, we multiply that by 40 to see how many Palestinians Israel would have killed if this war was going on for 5 years and the population numbers were equivalent. 20,080,000. $20,080,000. That is 10 times more than the current population of Gaza itself. Let me just repeat that for those of you who, because I did go through that a bit quickly. Israel has killed an average of 2,000 Palestinian civilians per week in the past, month? Since the start of this new, well, it's not even a new conflict, but this new phase of the war. They've killed an average of 2,000 Palestinians per week. That, if we multiply that out across a year, that brings us to 104,000 Palestinian civilians dead in a year, which is, mind you, around 1/20th of the entire Palestinian population of Gaza. Multiply that out further, because Ben Shapiro is making a comparison to World War II here. We multiply that out by 5 years, and that brought us to around 520,000 Palestinian civilians dead. Then you multiply that number by 40. And the reason you multiply that by 40 is because you want to account for the difference between the German population and the Palestinian population in order to work out, proportionally speaking, how many civilians would Israel have killed if World War II was against the Palestinians. And the answer we come to is 20,080,000, which is 10 times higher than the entire Palestinian population of Gaza itself. Now, you may be thinking that's a completely ridiculous comparison, but it's actually not. I've just taken Ben Shapiro's logic to its conclusion here. Ben Shapiro is making a comparison to what the Allies did in World War II, and I've merely done the math and multiplied that out. But to make it worse, that 20 million figure, even though it is 10 times higher than the entire Palestinian population of Gaza, it still wouldn't be near what the actual number would be according to this maths that I've just done. And the reason for that is because, as I mentioned around 10 minutes ago, the Allies were employing strategic bombing, inaccurate, basically blind bombing of civilian areas. Whereas in this conflict, Israel is using targeted munitions combined with satellite and drone footage to actually mark where they're going to target and then bomb those. So if Israel were in World War II fighting against Palestinians and they were using strategic bombing, the number of people they would have killed would be even higher than the 20 million figure that we just worked out. It would be this would be like the Holocaust, but 3 times over. Do you see just how insane the comparison is to World War II that Shapiro has made here? But now again, I know for a fact that obviously this comparison doesn't really work. But when you take Shapiro's logic to its conclusion and you actually compare what Israel's done to the Palestinians to the Allies' treatment of the German population, there is no comparison. What Israel has done is so much worse. So much worse. It's worse because Israel aren't using strategic bombing. They are using targeted munitions, so they are deliberately targeting the civilian areas they are bombing. That's the first thing. It's worse because on a when you account for the differences in population, as we did at the end there, the Palestinians are much smaller. So when you compare that to obviously what the Allied strategic bombings were far more spread out across many different cities, across many different areas, which were nowhere near as densely populated as Gaza is. You account for the difference there. You lastly account for the differences in how long the war was. World War II was like 4 to 5 years. This war so far has been about a month, but will likely stretch on for several more months. While it comes to that. Yeah, they don't realize how big 500 people are. Do you see Shapiro's response to like hundreds of Palestinians being killed for just a single Hamas militant? It's completely deranged. He just brushes them off. Yeah, they're accidents of war. They're not accidents of war. This is not World War II. And even if it was World War II, taking it to its conclusion, what Israel would have done would have been far worse. So just keep that figure in mind. 20 million. That's what the number would be if Israel were in the position of the Allies. Taking Shapiro's logic to its conclusion. But let's just listen to the remainder of this to see if there's anything else that comes up. So again, he makes the Dresden comparison, which is the exact same comparison that deranged Israeli ambassador made in the stream that we did a few weeks ago. So again, in Dresden, A, it was strategic bombing, not targeted munitions, and B, the targets of those were German manufacturers that were producing weapons for the Nazis. And so a lot of German workers there were killed. That is not the same thing as Israel launching targeted munitions, leveling entire residential neighborhoods, targeting safe zones, targeting areas in the West Bank where Hamas don't even exist, and doing all of this with full knowledge that most of the Hamas militants are waiting for the IDF underground. So, yeah, no, the Dresden comparison doesn't work. Shapiro is an idiot and he has no idea what he's talking about.
This is not a just war. What Israel is doing is not a just war. There's a difference between fighting the Nazis.
So it's not a just war. It's not a just war. When you fight a war against people who murder 1,500 of your civilians, take 233 of them in the last count, captive into tunnels. It is not a just war to obliterate them. It is a just war.
Now, by Ben Shapiro's logic here, if what Israel has done is a just war because they're responding to the massacre of 1,500 of their own population. For the record, we actually don't know how many of those were civilians and how many were military. I think most were civilians, but a good chunk of them, at least according to Haaretz, were military personnel as well. But if what Israel has done is a just response, What about the thousands of people who have been kidnapped and detained without trial by Israel? The thousands of Palestinians who are already being detained and within like military prisons and will not face trial, or if they do, it'll be a 90-something% conviction rate. What about those? And also, what about the thousands of Palestinians who sit in the past month, Palestinian workers in Israel who have basically disappeared? Would that not be grounds for a just war against Israel, according to Shapiro? What about the past 75 years of ethnic cleansing and apartheid and military occupation? What about the history of indiscriminate massacre of civilians? Would those not be valid grounds for a just war? Now, of course, in reality, these would be valid grounds for a just war. But the reason why Shapiro doesn't think that's the case, but he does think that Hamas's actions against Israeli civilians are grounds for a just war, is because he believes the Palestinian people are racially inferior. He does not believe that their grievances when it comes to, say, self-determination and, massacres and injustices committed against them are actually worth responding to. I need to go get the door. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, let's see what else.
Civilians for the past 75 years, and there was no headlines about it, and there was nobody said that the Palestinians were
Israel does not
justified.
kill civilians, Palestinian terrorists do.
Israel
If Israel was down to guns tomorrow, there'd be a second Holocaust. If the Palestinians put down their guns tomorrow, there'd be a Palestinian.
This is absolutely false, by the way. We know this is completely false because Israel has no intention whatsoever of creating a Palestinian state. Their politicians have said time and time again they don't want that, and more importantly, they have made it impossible with the massive expansion of settlements in the West Bank. So yes, a Palestinian state with the current borders, when you separate the areas where the Israelis are and the Palestinians are, would be completely impossible. There would need to be a mass exodus of these illegal settlers from the West Bank into Israel in order for that to be the case, or a massive land swap, which Netanyahu would never agree to. So no, there will not be a Palestinian state. Shapiro is lying here. What else did he not say? Oh yeah, so he reiterated the claim that Israel is not deliberately targeting civilians. That is completely false. We know they are because, as mentioned, thousands of Palestinian workers in Israel have been disappeared. From what we've seen of their treatment, they are being held in awful conditions. There was actual video footage of them being tortured as well. And in addition, they are targeting civilian areas that they have labeled as safe areas in the south, in Khan Yunis and Rafah, the areas they have told civilians to flee to. So yes, they are absolutely targeting civilians here. Shapiro has no evidence whatsoever for the claim that their targets are Hamas militants and Hamas militants alone. And secondly, even if they did want to target Hamas militants, Shapiro is again presenting a false dichotomy. Just because they are targeting Hamas militants, allegedly, even if that were true, wouldn't change the fact that they are also targeting Palestinian civilians, because once more, we don't have strategic bombing, we have deliberate, targeted precision munitions, satellite footage and drones, so Israel can clearly see where the civilians are, they can see the areas they're about to bomb, they can see the number of people they're going to kill, and they are killing them anyway. So yes, they are targeting civilians by every definition of the word. Yeah, I don't think there is much more that needs to be said here. I think Shapiro's main tactic when it comes to winning debates is shouting over the other person as much as possible, taking advantage of the fact that they're not as media trained as he is, and then picking fights that he knows he can win and avoiding any kind of confrontation with somebody that might actually know what they're talking about. Yep, not just adults being detained, yep, children as well. There's footage of literally 10-year-old children being arrested by IDF forces in the West Bank. It is abysmal.
That is the reality. And let me ask you, I'm just going to ask you the last question, the same question I asked her. Which part of Palestine is occupied?
The entirety of Palestine. Well,
I appreciate you expressing your full genocidal intent of the Jewish people living within.
So once again, Ben Shapiro just blatantly misrepresents what she claims. He claims that if you believe that the entirety of Palestine is occupied, which it is, and that's a completely reasonable thing to say, it means you are calling for the destruction of the Jewish people living there. That is absolutely false. The reason why Ben Shapiro says this is because he himself is an ethno-nationalist, and so he cannot possibly envisage a state which isn't also ethno-nationalist in Palestine. He thinks that, well, if Israel has ethnically cleansed the Palestinians, has them under apartheid, then when Palestinians call for their freedom and the liberation of occupied land, that means they must also be calling for a genocidal ethno-state of their own. But that's absolutely not the case. What they're calling for is an end to apartheid, a right of return for the Palestinian people from the lands in, say, Haifa, Jaffa, Akko, Ramla, West Jerusalem, from which they were expelled from 1947 onwards. As mentioned, end of apartheid in the West Bank, the removal of settlements from those areas because they are indeed illegal, at least the overwhelming majority of them are, and an end to the open-air prison that is Gaza and the permissibility for them to go back to their lands, some of which are literally just on the border outside of Gaza in Israel. So no, it is not a call for genocide. Shapiro claims it's a call for genocide because he wants to smear his opposition, and he also cannot possibly fathom anything other than a genocidal ethno-state. It's basically a projection. Every single accusation that Israel apologists make is a confession. He likes the idea of a genocidal ethno-state, so long as it is like for his side, for Israel. And it's against the Palestinian Arabs. So he doesn't even address her point. She's completely correct here. You can have that kind of a state. Oh, but that's going to go wonderfully, again, because he cannot fathom the possibility of a state like that working. Because for him, he knows that Israel has pushed the Palestinians in Gaza to the brink where they, in 2006, threw in their lot with Hamas. By the way, most Palestinians today don't actually support a lot of Hamas's tactics, but they gave them their support in 2006 because Israel gave them no other option but violent attacks against Israel in order to basically defend themselves, in order to chase their own self-determination. He also uploaded a clip as well, Epic Exchange, Ben Shapiro versus Andy. So this is the one he thinks is his best take. I'm not going to listen to him speak. I'm assuming it's the same bit.
That is just a reality.
Okay, so it is the same bit.
You should talk to people in Dresden, but it's
that same. I'm just trying to see if there's anything else towards the end. I'm not for the destruction of Jews. Okay, so
full genocidal intent of the Jewish people living within. I'm sure that's going to go. Under the same people who are governing the Gaza Strip, where zero Jews live.
So he claims that, well, this can't happen as shown in the Gaza Strip where 0 Jews live. So again, yes, it is indeed the case that 0 Jews live there. Yes, it is indeed the case that... So actually, the reason why there were no Jews in the Gaza Strip is because Israel pulled all of them out. They, quote-unquote, disengaged from Gaza in the early 2000s, and they just kept it as sort of like an open-air prison after the Second Intifada. It is straight mask off. And the reason why is because there was an outbreak of violence during the Second Intifada, and this came about as a result of the failure of the peace process. Israel had no intention of doing a peace process in accordance with international law, so the quote-unquote peace offers they were making fell flat, obviously, to the surprise of absolutely nobody. And so, yeah, there was an outbreak of violence, and then Israel pulled out of Gaza. I don't know why he assumes. Well, no, we do know why he assumes that that would be a template for how everything else would work if the Palestinians were allowed a right of return to their homes. Now, again, he makes a completely false. He does what's basically called a non sequitur here. So he takes what's happening in Gaza with Hamas. Oh, Hamas don't like Jews. Hamas are anti-Semitic. Look at their charter and shit. And says, well, if there were to be peace between Palestinians and Israelis, and there was a single state with no apartheid, for some reason it would look like Gaza. I don't know how he's come to that conclusion or why he's made that assumption. I've
been talking about my Helix
I don't give a
mattress for years. So
shit about your sponsorship, mate. Okay, it's just more sponsorships. Okay.
percent of the population is Arab Muslim. Also, there are 0 Jews living in the Gaza Strip, 0 Jews living in the Palestinian areas of the West Bank, 0 Jews living in Lebanon, 0 Jews...
First of all, a couple of things he said there are just factually wrong. Yes, it is indeed the case there are 20% of Palestinians left within Israel, and they do face structural discrimination. The Bedouins are often kicked off of their home in the Negev desert. The Palestinian Arabs living in Israel are often subject to far greater levels of discrimination than the Jewish people living there. His claim with regards to there being no Jews living within the Palestinian areas of the West Bank, the Israeli settlers are taking land from the West Bank and settling there, leaving, basically kicking out the Palestinians and forcing the Palestinians to go into other enclaves, like Bantustan-type enclaves. Why would there be Israeli settlers in there? Why would there be Jews there? What is he talking about? He's just saying stuff now. Moved 14k into the West Bank, Ariel Sharon, when he went over to Al-Aqsa with a couple of hundred guards to proclaim that Al-Aqsa will always be under Israeli control. Yeah, that's exactly what happened.
living in Jordan, 0 Jews living in Saudi Arabia,
And so
zero
again,
Jews
zero
living...
Jews living in Jordan, Saudi Arabia. So, first of all, Palestinian Arabs are not Jordanian Arabs and Saudi Arabs. There's this thing that apologists for Israel, Zionists do a lot, is they just look at the Palestinians and they're like, oh, Arabs, and so they bring up all these other things that happen in Arab countries to say, well, this is why you guys don't deserve equal rights. This is why you guys don't deserve self-determination and don't deserve the right to return to your home. You don't deserve basic human dignity because, well, if you look at other Arab countries, there aren't many Jews living there. Now, there are actually not a lot of Jews living in those Arab countries anymore for a number of reasons. First of all, there weren't that many to begin with. And secondly, a lot of them were expelled in nationalist conflict during the 20th century. But it doesn't follow that Palestinians should be aggressively persecuted. Well, it does follow that Palestinians should be if, as Ben Shapiro believes, if the Palestinians aren't real people and they just fit within this wider monolithic group of scary brown Arabs who kill Jews, allegedly. So it's clear why he thinks that. One thing I will say about Ben Shapiro is that he looks slightly less punchable with a beard than he did like 5 years ago.
Egypt, 0 Jews living in Syria. But, Israel is the problem. But points for honesty. I mean, at least she just says the thing. The state of Israel should be destroyed.
She didn't
and here's
say the state of Israel should be destroyed. So again, Shapiro's his logic here is basically that if you don't believe that the state of Israel should be a Jewish ethno-state where the Palestinians under occupation are treated as second-class citizens who are ethnically cleansed with no right to return to their homes, if you don't believe that's an okay state of affairs, it means you are for the destruction of the entire state itself and the genocide of Jews. It's just completely deranged nonsense. And what's interesting here is that this is kind of exactly like what the defenders of 19th century slavery said. When Thomas Jefferson famously said, we have on our scales here, we have on the one hand justice, the abolition of slavery, and on the other hand we have self-preservation. The idea being that, well, if you abolish slavery, it would destroy our very existence of like the white people there. And this is exactly the same argument that Ben Shapiro is making here. Ben Shapiro claims that, well, if you give the Palestinians a right to return, you have one state. Well, there is already one state from the river to the sea, and that is the state of Israel. If you were to give them equal rights, the Palestinians will just kill all the Jews. Douglas Murray also shared a bunch of stuff from the debate as well. Has had some really interesting takes over the past couple of days. He's a good friend of Shapiro. If Israel, Britain, or America deported 2 million illegals, it would be Nazis, fascists, ethnic cleansing. But if Pakistan does it, not a peep. Once again, dear West, we are being played. So he is basically applauding something recent that's happened in Pakistan, with them mass deporting a very large number of Afghan refugees who are undocumented. Now, he doesn't really give a reason why this is good, but because he sees like brown people being expelled, or specifically in this case, Afghans being expelled, he thinks it's great. Now, there is... sorry, I'm now going off topic from Shapiro, and we'll go back to that in a minute. But essentially, he just assumes that that is a good thing, because obviously he himself is an ethno-nationalist. Braverman pushes to restrict tents for rough sleepers. So this is our lovely Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, restricting tents for rough sleepers. And his response is, oh no, you mean illegal migrants shouldn't be given priority over taxpayers in the UK? How very dare you, unbelievable. Wait, what's this got to do with illegal immigrants? Am I being stupid? Wait, does he just see people living in tents because they can't afford a home and just thinks, oh, brown people, get them all out? What does this have to do with illegal immigrants? Am I being stupid? Oh. Alastair Campbell and his friends destroyed our country by bringing millions of illegal settlers here. Don't be distracted. This sick man deserves a reckoning. What? They didn't bring millions of illegal settlers here. They're illegal because there is no legal way for asylum seekers to enter the United Kingdom. Millions of illegal settlers here. Postmodernist drinking song. And by the way, Gary Lineker, if we want a ceasefire now, why don't all the marchers simply call for the immediate return of the Jewish hostages? But it doesn't seem to occur to the marchers, or to you. I wonder why. Because Palestine was being oppressed by Israel well before Hamas took a bunch of hostages. We know this because Israel has thousands of Palestinians being detained without charge, without any kind of trial. And they've taken thousands more. They've disappeared thousands of Palestinian workers in Israel over the past few weeks, presumably also to use as hostages as well. So no. Many Gazans are sharing this footage, which appears to show a group of residents gunned down by Hamas police on the Al-Rashid Beach Road as they tried to flee south from Israeli offensive, and it triggers outrage among residents. So, for the record, I don't know if this has changed as of yesterday, but there is no verification that these people were shot down by Hamas police yet. And chat, please do go wrong. He is a South Park character. He's just a complete idiot. Armistice Day is sacrosanct. I agree with the Prime Minister. It's unacceptable to desecrate it with that. Numerous disturbing reports from British nationals fighting for the Israeli army and Israeli non-state militia. My Concern 2017 is prevalent today. David Cameron's disastrous diversity hire, Saida Warsi, wants Israel to lose. She pours more vitriol on the young men and women of the IDF than on anyone else. Now, the sheer audacity for Douglas Murray, of all people, to call out others for being quote-unquote diversity hires, hired because they were brown. The only reason Douglas Murray is given a modicum of airtime within the conservative media space is because he is a homosexual. Oh no, you can't call me homophobic. We give a platform to Douglas Murray, who has spent the last 20 years talking about how much he loves dick and hates brown people. That's his entire grift. It's just regurgitating conservative propaganda whilst saying I'm gay and just going on about that.
Palestine was ruled by the British. They carved off Transjordan in 1920, and Transjordan was made into Transjordan with the Hashemite kingdom, which, by the way, is not domestic to the actual area of Jordan. So if you're talking about a colonial outpost, Jordan would be it, since the Hashemite kingdom has nothing
So yes, he is indeed correct that the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan was a colonial outpost / vassal of the British Empire. But I don't remember the British Empire doing a mass ethnic cleansing of the Jordanian people into the Arabian desert and then replacing them with British national settlers. Just because two things are referred to as colonies or colonial doesn't mean they are the same thing. I mean, to be fair, I've not seen the wider context of what the other guy was claiming, but if Shapiro's argument here is, if you're calling Israel a colonial outpost, you have to call Jordan a colonial outpost. Well, no, that doesn't follow. There are different types of colonialism, as many historians such as Patrick Wolfe have talked about extensively. Just because two things can be referred to by the same word doesn't mean those two things are exactly the same. Yes, I have seen the clip of Ben Shapiro getting dunked on by a pre-recorded video. It was so funny. I don't know where it is now, but basically, for those of you who haven't seen it, he was reacting to some TikTok video where the TikTok guy was talking about the peace process, and Ben Shapiro would make an argument like, the Palestinians rejected the peace proposals, and then the guy in the pre-recorded video would go on to talk about why those peace proposals were bullshit, or why it was Israel who broke the ceasefire. So this guy he was essentially getting debunked by a pre-recorded video he was watching and reacting to.
Do with the actual Palestinian Arabs who are living in Transjordan. Talking about the Peel Commission. If the idea is that there would have to be a separation of populations in order to effectuate a two-state solution, which you deny, then I was right. Of course there was a deal on the table. The Jews accepted it. The Arabs rejected it.
I don't think that's true. The Peel Commission was not accepted by the Jews. Maybe it was, actually, and I'm wrong. The Peel Commission, known formerly as Palestine Royal Commission, was a British Royal Commission headed by Lord Peel. Report that recommended had become unworkable and recommended partition. The British Cabinet endorsed the partition plan in principle, requested more information following publication. They recommended actual partition plan. Arabs opposed the partition plan and condemned it unanimously. Proposed the idea of a Jewish state and called for an independent state in Palestine with protection of all legitimate Jewish and other minority rights, safeguarding the reasonable British interests. They also demanded cessation of all Jewish immigration and land purchase in Palestine. They argued the creation of a state with lack of independent Palestine was a betrayal of the word given by Britain. Zionism was bitterly divided. A resolution they rejected the specific partition. The principal partition is generally thought to have been accepted or not rejected outright by a major faction. So he's telling half a story here. Yes, it is indeed the case the Arabs rejected the Peel Commission, but so did the Zionists. They still wanted partition. They just wanted a bigger chunk of it, essentially. According to Benny Morris, Ben-Gurion and Weizmann saw it as a stepping stone to some further expansion in the eventual takeover. Oh yeah, we talked about this 2 years ago in the documentary I did in 2021. Yeah, Israel is a settler colony and Jordan wasn't. Yeah, you're right. It's as simple as that. Question. Why did the Arabs reject the Peel Commission and also the 1947 UN partition proposal? Well, it's pretty simple. There is nothing hateful, there is nothing irrational, and there is nothing bigoted about not wanting to give up a chunk of your land to a group of predominantly newly arrived settlers. It is absolutely reasonable and it is absolutely fair for the Arab Higher Committee to call for an independent state of Palestine with protection of all legitimate Jewish and other minority rights and safeguarding of reasonable British interests. Well, maybe not the reasonable British interests because we don't really want the British there. That's absolutely reasonable. Completely. Now, what Shapiro is arguing here is basically that anything other than the Arabs accepting the creation of a Jewish state under the British and then under the UN, anything other than that would be bad and evil on their part. But that's just absurd once you think about it. Would the Germans have accepted giving up a bunch of their land to the Jews after World War II? Would the Dutch or the French have been okay with doing that? To which Shapiro might argue, well, Germany was already a sovereign country, whereas Palestine wasn't, which A, doesn't actually matter. Palestine not having been a sovereign state and having been under British occupation does not mean they don't have self-determination over their area that should be their country. And more importantly, Nazi Germany wasn't a sovereign state by the end of World War II either. It was almost fully under Allied occupation, and they really could have done whatever they wanted to. I mean, they did carve up chunks of the country, and they gave they gave Poland back to Poland. They gave Schleswig-Holstein back to Denmark, and a bunch of other land changes. And obviously, they gave the Sudetenland and the rest of Europe back to who it belonged to before the Nazis occupied it. But no, they could have given some of that to the Jews, but they didn't. They didn't do that. Because Arab self-determination just wasn't as important to them.
You did not actually undermine my case.
This guy's not doing himself any favors by basically raping his microphone, but
should be no deal in the first place.
In his diary states.
Hold on. I listened to your whole bullshit history for like 5 minutes here, so at least let me respond to it. Your entire claim is that the Arabs did not reject peace, and then in your own disquisition, you admitted that the Arabs rejected the Peel Commission plan, which was a separation between the Jews and the Arabs, which gave an extraordinary amount of land.
So Ben Shapiro is again making a false dichotomy here. He is claiming that either the Arabs don't want peace or they accept partition. And they do want peace. But that's a false dichotomy. You can reject a partition proposal whilst also wanting peace between the Jews and the Arabs living there, which is exactly what, as we just found, the Arab High Committee called for. They called for what? An independent state of Palestine with rights for Jews and the Arabs, and they called for a cessation of Jewish immigration to Palestine, because they wanted a state there in Palestine. They didn't want the Jews carving out their own state. So no, you can be in favour of peace whilst also being against the creation of a separate state. And to which you might argue, well, oh, why were they against the Jews immigrating to Palestine? Would you have been okay with, say, the mass migration of refugees into your country, Shapiro? And ironically, this is being retweeted by Douglas Murray, the most anti-refugee person on the face of the planet. So I don't see why the Palestinians should have been held up to that standard either. And also bear in mind, this opposition to Jewish immigration came about after a few decades of discrimination at the hands of the Jewish settlers there. Obviously, as we know, the Jewish Colonial Trust, the Jewish National Fund, systematically as a policy discriminated against Arab workers because they wanted the Jews there to become self-sufficient. So yeah, it makes total sense that they were now not as open to Jewish immigration as they were like 30 years before the Peel Commission took place.
The Arabs then rejected the peace partition plan proposed by the United Nations in 1947.
Again, there is absolutely nothing irrational, hateful, or bigoted about not wanting to give away 55% of your land to a group of predominantly newly arrived settlers who compose nothing more than a third of the population. It is absolutely reasonable for them to instead demand a single state from the river to the sea for all the people living there. That is completely fine. And also bear in mind, the Zionists, such as Ben-Gurion, who was like the father of the state of Israel, literally said that the partition plan in 1947 was a temporary measure. Like, they literally said that.
They then proceeded to reject the Oslo Accords.
That is absolutely false. They did not reject the Oslo Accords of 1993. In fact, that is so insanely wrong that, oh my God, where to start? Okay, for those of you who don't know, the Oslo Accords was a peace process between 1993 and 2001, and Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat both signed the Oslo Accords in 1993. Do you know why the Oslo peace process ended? It ended because Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated by extremist Israelis, domestic Israeli terrorists who were spurned by the stochastic terrorism of the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu, because Yitzhak Rabin was being labeled a Nazi and stuff by domestic Israeli extremists because he was contemplating the possibility of adhering to international law and evacuating some of the illegal settlements in the West Bank. And for this, he was called a Nazi who was giving up Israeli land. And that just tells you not just how dishonest Shapiro is being here by falsely claiming that it was the Palestinians who rejected the Oslo process, but also it goes to show just how belligerent and opposed to compliance with international law Israel was being from the get-go.
93. After that, they rejected the Wye River Accords in 98. They rejected Ehud Barak's very generous offer in
Ehud
2000.
Barak's offer in 2000 at Camp David was not generous. What on earth is he talking about? Now, for the record, the quote-unquote generous peace offer made at Camp David in 2000 was made by Bill Clinton. The original offer made by Ehud Barak was completely untenable. Israel offered Palestinians 66% of the West Bank. What? How was that generous? The generous offer he's talking about was offered by Bill Clinton, not Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak's was just rejected from the get-go because it was completely deranged. After mediation from Bill Clinton, eventually the offer was made for between 91 to 95% of the West Bank. The problem was this was still not a generous peace offer. And the reason why it was not a generous peace offer, even though it was 91% of the West Bank, was because this was not going to create a sovereign Palestinian state. Exactly. What is mine is mine and what is yours is negotiable. That is exactly what it was. It was not going to lead to a creation of a sovereign Palestinian state because this state was to be demilitarized. If you remember, after World War I, there was something called the Treaty of Versailles, which was signed in 1919. And the Treaty of Versailles called upon Germany to demilitarize the Rhineland. Compare that to what was being offered to the Palestinians at Camp David, a completely demilitarized Palestinian state. That means that if Israel ever did any land grabs in the future, there would be nothing the Palestinians could do to stop them. And if they did try and do something like they did begin militarizing, they'd be accused of violating the Camp David summit, or the Camp David peace offer. So this was not going to be a Palestinian state. How can you tell an independent country that we're going to give you independence, but you're not allowed an army? Even when the Ottoman Empire conquered most of Eastern Europe, and they gave terms to their independent vassals, Transylvania, Wallachia, and Moldavia, not even they called for them to demilitarize. This is comparable to a Carthaginian peace between what the Romans offered Carthage after the Second Punic War. I'm sorry, but that was not a generous peace offer at all. And definitely not what Barak initially offered the Palestinians, 66%. The final offer was not either. But Shapiro is an idiot.
They rejected Olmert's very
Ehud
generous
Olmert,
offer.
I'm pretty sure, didn't actually offer them a proper peace offer. What was it? Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority met 36 times, lower-level talks. No need to share a single business ecosystem. Regarding Jerusalem, the leaders agreed that Jewish neighbours should remain to Israeli sovereignty, whilst Arab neighbours would revert to Palestinian sovereignty. So this is the offer between 2007 and 2008, the peace talks with Ehud Olmert. The Palestinians asked for clarifications of the territorial land swap, since they were unable to ascertain what land these percentages affected, since Israeli and Palestinian calculations of the West Bank differ by several hundred square kilometres, which makes sense, of course, because Israel has obviously been annexing areas of the West Bank, bringing it under their control, so they don't include those areas they've annexed, or at least not all of those areas within their calculations. In the year of such clarifications, Olmert's 6.3% annexation might work out to closer to 8.5%. And the talks ended with both sides claiming the other side dropped follow-up contacts. And then obviously Hamas took over Gaza. So no, he's being very dishonest with this as well. This was not a formal peace offer that was just offered and then rejected without any good reason. There were peace talks, there were offers and counter-offers made, but there was a lack of clarity between what was going to get annexed and what wasn't going to get annexed, and so the peace process kind of fell apart.
In 2008, Every single peace deal that has been proposed by Israel or anyone else has been rejected by the Arabs for a very simple reason, which was the very first question I asked you. You do not accept that there should be a Jewish state anywhere in this region.
So I want to point out two things here. First of all, what Shapiro is claiming here is factually wrong. Yasser Arafat and the PLO did in fact recognize the state of Israel during these peace processes, during Oslo, during Camp David, and even later. I think they still do recognize Israel. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I'm pretty sure they still do. Initially, very early on in the process, not post-process, but very early on in the conflict with the Peel Commission and with the 1947 partition proposal, yes, the Palestinian Arabs didn't want there to be a separate Jewish state, obviously. But that's not bad. Why would they want that to be the case? So yeah, he's kind of being dishonest here, but he's also being misleading because he doesn't explain why it's a bad thing that the Palestinian Arabs living there didn't want the creation of a Jewish state. He just assumes that them not wanting that shows their own intransigence and bigotry rather than a reflection of their own self-determination and not being okay with the carving up of their homeland. If I'm not mistaken, the envisaged Jewish state as mapped out by the United Nations was supposed to compose like 41% Palestinian Arabs or something, which is quite significant and makes total sense that the Palestinian Arabs wouldn't want to be living under that, especially when you consider the previous decades of discrimination they had faced by the Jewish settlers and also their own desire for self-determination and a single state across all of Palestine.
So as long as that's the case, there's literally nothing to argue about. You cannot simultaneously...
Okay, about the rest of that.
Numbers. More Germans died than Brits in World War II. Did that mean that the British were wrong in World War II?
But, so as we've established, right, the issue here isn't the number of them they've killed. I mean, it is a problem, for the record. It is astronomically larger on a per week and per population, per capita basis, as we've just established, than the Allies killed in World War II. What Israel has done is far, far greater than that. But even that notwithstanding, we still have the fact that they are of course not using strategic bombing. They are deliberately targeting Palestinian civilian neighborhoods under the false pretenses of them containing Hamas militants. So the comparison here just doesn't work.
With is the same thing that I came in with, which is that there are certain values that are worth protecting. There are certain values that are worth protecting. And one of those values is the value of understanding. The value of understanding clear moral differentiation, which obviously has been completely obscured. I think tonight we've seen some evidence of people obscuring some clear moral differentiation between the targeted burning of babies in their homes in front of their mothers by shoving them in an oven and people attempting to kill terrorists who are themselves putting civilians in harm's way in violation of the rules of war and the Geneva Conventions. And if you're one of the people who's making this sort of moral equivalence, I ask for you to check your own heart. And if you're one of the people who's watching people make this moral equivalence and being convinced by supposed...
So let's talk a bit more about this moral equivalence, because I know we spoke a bit about the start with regards to this, and we talked about the comparisons between what Hamas did on the 7th of October and what Israel is doing now. So first and foremost, we've already mentioned the fact that these are not accidental killings of civilians. These are deliberate targeting of civilian areas. And yes, he did just describe Deir Yassin. That's exactly what he just described. That is pretty much what happened there in 1948. Okay, yeah. So as we were saying, we've talked a bit about how these things are not equivalent to one another, and we've talked about how the accidental killing of civilian casualties by blindly bombing cities in World War II and strategic bombing is not the same thing as using satellite imagery and drones to deliberately target civilian homes under the false pretenses that there are Hamas militants there, when in reality there is no evidence for that whatsoever, and they are just destroying entire residential neighborhoods. So those are not the same thing. But also I want to talk about the claim here that Ben Shapiro is making with regards to Hamas putting civilians in danger. Now, that's a very popular claim made by Israelis, made by apologists for Israel, made by Zionists. They claim the only reason why Israel kills so many civilians is because Hamas puts those civilians in harm's way. Now, there's a few issues with this. The first issue is that this is factually incorrect. Okay, it's as simple as that. It is wrong because most of these Hamas militants are underground waiting for Israel. They're not just out in the open chilling and waving at a satellite saying, "Oh, come bomb this civilian area." There may be examples of them having done that, but the idea that this is what's happened in all or even close to the majority of the 9,000 Palestinian civilians killed over the past few weeks is completely delusional. That's the first thing. The second thing is, God, there was a thread on it that I retweeted a while back, and I really want to dig it up again because it was very, very well written. Here it is, Marco and Jones. Okay. So, yeah, something the Israeli Defense Force will often do is they will justify the mass killing of Palestinian civilians by claiming that Hamas infrastructure is near a mosque, school, or hospital, or the Hamas militants themselves are near mosques, schools, and hospitals. The problem here is that mathematically speaking, everywhere in Gaza is close to a mosque, a school, or a hospital clinic. So Mark did the maths here. 1,230 mosques, 158 primary care clinics, and Gaza is obviously 360 kilometers squared, but it's actually 309 kilometers squared because you've got to account for the no-go zone between the border and Gaza itself. And then once you actually divide that area in square kilometers by the number of like mosques, schools, and hospitals, you actually end up with, well, everywhere in Gaza, no matter where you are, is basically close to one of these. So really, there is actually nowhere Hamas can fire from that would be considered, at least by Israel's standards, safely away from Palestinian civilian infrastructure. Yeah, so in 2021, the IDF said 205 meters is near for Hamas rockets. Look at what a circle with a 205-meter radius looks like on the map. This is how the IDF defined near. So yeah, so for the IDF, if you have a rocket launch pad, say here, then it's okay for them to bomb that mosque, basically. Like that's their argument, pretty much. Like, yeah, say goodbye to this entire area that's within a 200-meter radius of. It's just so insane once you actually think about it. Also, pretty sure Tel Aviv's headquarters is bang in the middle of. I'm pretty sure the IDF headquarters is bang in the middle of downtown Tel Aviv. So I mean, talk about the pot calling the kettle black. Yeah. Six videos of attack. Yes, this is back in the 13th of October. Things have just gotten even worse since half a month ago, and it really is quite insane. Oh yeah, this was quite funny. Do Palestinians deserve to be free? The question of whether Palestinians deserve to be free is a complex and highly debated issue, and opinions on this matter vary widely, according to ChatGPT. Do Israelis deserve to be free? Yes, like any other group of people, Israelis deserve to be free, the right to freedom, self-determination. I think this is just, I mean, I know, it's just saying things based on the database it's been trained with, but it really just goes to show, oh, thank you, Zaid, that's very kind of you. It really does just go to show the degree of apathy a lot of people have on the internet towards Palestinians. 10-minute scroll through, yeah, all the names of the people killed by Israel, and this was only up to the October 26th. This is now outdated. This has like at least another 1,000 people to add to it. This was like 9 minutes to scroll through. It's really quite insane and haunting. Yeah, I do miss Michael Brooks. He was brilliant on this. Not a complicated situation at all. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else there really is to say on this. I think it's increasingly apparent from Israel's actions, their deliberate targeting of safe zones and routes to those safe zones, their deliberate targeting of Palestinians in the West Bank where Hamas don't have power, their deliberate disappearances of Palestinians in Israel, combined with their universally genocidal rhetoric from the ruling Likud party, it is indeed textbook genocide. And I think the Craig Mocheber's letter, his resignation letter, he was basically the United Nations Human Rights Director in New York. His resignation letter just sums it up perfectly. This will be my last official communication to you as Director of the New York office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. I write at a moment of great anguish for the world, including for many of our colleagues. Once again, we are seeing a genocide unfolding before our eyes, and the organization that we serve appears powerless to stop it. As someone who has investigated human rights in Palestine since the 1980s, lived in Gaza as a UN human rights advisor in the 1990s, and carried out several human rights missions to the country before and since, this is deeply personal to me. I also worked in these halls through the genocides against the Tutsis, Bosnian Muslims, the Yazidi, and Rohingya. In each case, when the dust settled and the horrors had been perpetrated against defenseless civilian populations, it became painfully clear that we had failed in our duty to meet the imperatives of the prevention of mass atrocities, the protection of the vulnerable, and accountability for the perpetrators. And so it has been with successive waves of murder and persecution against the Palestinians throughout the entire life of the UN. High Commissioner, we are failing again. He is completely correct. What Israel is essentially doing now is basically genocidal. The indiscriminate massacre of civilians, irrespective of whether or not there is a quote-unquote militant there, and even if there was, massacring those people with the hope that you're going to kill them would not be morally justified in the slightest. Shapiro's entire argument is just completely wrong, and it is deranged to even hear it. He obviously would not hold the standard for Israelis living in Tel Aviv, as we spoke about with regards to the LBC interview earlier on in the stream. If Hamas were hiding out in tunnels beneath Tel Aviv, Israel absolutely would not be indiscriminately bombing the hell out of their own city. And his claim that either you support Hamas killing civilians or you're okay with Israel bombing the shit out of Gaza is a completely false dichotomy, and there's no evidence for it whatsoever. Zachary Foster is also a great source for stuff on Israel-Palestine if you're looking for someone to follow. Yeah, this is also another very good example of what happens when Palestinians do try to peacefully protest. In 2018, they did their March of Return, demanding they be freed from Israel blockade and be allowed to go back to the cities from which they were expelled. And so they did their big March of Return just in Gaza, and Israel just indiscriminately shot them all. So yeah, it is no surprise that Hamas did the attack on the 7th of October. I'm not surprised in the slightest. I think the killing of civilians was awful and inexcusable, but I'm literally not surprised at all. This is entirely a consequence of Israeli policymaking. This is entirely a consequence of Israel ramping up settler violence in the West Bank, ramping up the expansion of settlements there, ramping up the oppression of peaceful protesters in Gaza, making it extremely clear that not only will Palestinian refugees not be allowed to return to their homes, but if they do try to return, they will be mass murdered and shot at indiscriminately, the way that they were in the 1950s. So yeah, this is unsurprising in the least. Yeah, I think that's basically it for this stream. I don't really have much else to add to this. I think, yeah, what's happened is awful, and hoping things improve. Was there anything else I forgot to say? Let me have a look. I am currently putting together a repository on Discord, which is basically going to be hosting very large amounts of... It's basically going to be a database documenting important elements and resources of Palestinian Palestinian history, Syrian history, and their current affairs as well. I'm currently working on it, and I may issue invites soon when it's ready. So yeah, that'll be coming out soon, hopefully. We'll see what happens. Just want to go back to this, actually. Peace process. David Accords, Israel. Peace process. So yeah, the fundamental reason why the quote-unquote peace process failed is because the peace process from 1990s onwards was not done with respect to international law. It was, as mentioned earlier in chat, from the yes, inshallah, I will link the repository to my channel when it is done. But yeah, as I was saying, it was done on the basis of Israel keeps everything they've got. Let's see what we can what scraps we can offer to the Palestinians as part of this process, and what we can get away with offering them. And a demilitarized state. Bloody hell. That really is something. And when insurgent groups in that demilitarized state arise, and when they inevitably start committing quote-unquote terrorist attacks, inevitably Israel would just invade again because, well, the Palestinian Arab state is demilitarized. It just goes to show how dishonest this process actually was. This was not a peace. These were not peace offers. This was just, what can we get away with giving you? What's the bare minimum we can offer? And if there is anything else, then that's it, really. Yeah. In the near future, I may also be working on a multi-part history, not just on the conflict itself, but also on Palestine in general, likely beginning from the 1900s and going forward. But we'll see how things go. It might get stuck in pre-production, like God knows how many things I've planned to do. So we'll see how things go. Inshallah. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I will catch you guys soon. Hopefully next time I upload, it'll be a video and not a live stream. But yeah, we'll see how things go. And yeah, all right then. See you.